It's a real privilege to have the chance to do this, because I actually think this is a very timely forum right now, given the recent developments that we're seeing in the OTC world and the impact that it's likely to have on audiology, frankly, and otology practices in the short and in the long term. So I want to leave with just kind of, for those of you, many of you may not be immediately familiar with kind of what we mean by over-the-counter hearing aids. And so let me just give a little bit of a background before I introduce our team of panelists right here. So very quickly, so the title of the talk here today, this is over-the-counter hearing aids. Where are we now? Where are we going? For all of you that are listening and watching, this is really intent to be, I want a forum and a dialogue. So if you have questions at all, don't hesitate to ask. You can jump in on the chat. Mega will be monitoring that. Of course, if you're in person, you can chime in as well. And if not, I have a number of questions that I'll be asking our panelists. So in terms of disclosures, of course, I have nothing, but Andy Sabin is employed by Bose, and he will be discussing a commercial product. And that's part of the reason why we do not have CME credit for tonight's session. Okay, so big picture. Hearing loss is extraordinarily common, okay? Yet many individuals with hearing loss in the United States are left untreated. So realistically, we estimate that over 30 million individuals, 30 million adults in the United States have hearing loss in both ears. And current estimates are that 28 million could benefit from hearing aids. So this is a significant proportion of the population in the United States, population of adults. But here's the thing, despite these millions upon millions upon millions of people who we know could likely benefit from hearing aids, if you look at adults over 70 years of age, less than 1/3 have tried hearing aids. And if we go under 70, then we're down about 16% what we think, the amount of individuals who try hearing aids. So this is a thorny problem. And there's a lot of factors, and frankly, there's been a lot of research that has gone into why individuals will pick up hearing aids, why they might not try hearing aids, okay? What are these barriers that present in this regard? And some of our panelists tonight have talked about this or have done research in this arena. I will tell you, like, there's a number of barriers to this. A default one that people commonly think of and look at, of course, is cost. Because right now, hearing aids, you know, in traditional markets of care can be very expensive, costing several $1,000s. Access to quality care. And this is a thorny problem both within audiology and frankly across the medical field as well, making sure that people have consistent access to high quality care. We all know that there's a social stigma surrounding hearing aids. You know, for whatever reason, hearing aids are often considered to make you seem old. And even today, I was seeing patients in the clinic today, and I had 4 different patients say to me, yeah, but then I feel old, okay? This is a recurring theme. Perceived need. A lot of people feel like, yeah, I've got hearing loss, but you know, I kind of think I kind of do well enough most of the time. And that's in part because they might modify their world, or the people around them might modify how they interact. These are factors that also drive it. And then frankly, there's intrinsic factors in recent years, personality differences, what we call locus of control. Do you feel like you're in control of your life outcomes? And people who think that more things are more luck driven are less likely to go and pursue hearing aids, whereas people who think my actions drive my outcomes are far more likely to take action. So where does this come in for hearing aids? Well, cost and access to care are thorny issues. And how do we resolve this? We can't necessarily change people's personality, but we can address the first two. So a very brief summary in terms of over-the-counter hearing aids. 2017, Congress passed legislation that requires the FDA to create a category of over-the-counter hearing aids, okay? And then officially, finally, so it took several years, longer than I think the original plan, but earlier on August 16, 2022, the FDA officially established a new category of over-the-counter hearing aids, okay? And literally the intent is, I pulled this directly from the site, to enable consumers with perceived mild to moderate hearing loss to purchase hearing aids directly from stores without need for a medical exam, prescription, or fitting by an audiologist. So this is a fundamental change in how hearing aids can be offered to patients. And really, the whole purpose of this is to make hearing aids more accessible and cheaper. And frankly, even this was just announced today on October 17th, you could purchase a Lexi Lumen hearing aid at Walgreens. So for example, it'd be $800 for 2 hearing aids, or you can basically get on a payment plan, like almost like leasing your hearing aids at this point. And the thing is, in terms of like, why does this model exist? Well, there's actually a recent clinical trial, I think landmark work from Larry Humes, of paraclinical trials, demonstrated that the perceived benefit from hearing aids was similar, whether you did it through an over-the-counter model or whether you did so through traditional audiology measures of care. But the big difference, of course, being that the over-the-counter group did have less satisfaction than if you went and saw a big nerd like me on a clinical basis, okay? And frankly, the over-the-counter group was less likely to purchase the hearing aids. They were more likely to purchase the hearing aids if they received traditional care afterward. And when we talk about changes to audiology path models or care models in the future, something like this might be pretty relevant. So we know that over-the-counter hearing aids are here. We know they're here to stay. We know that they likely work. So the question is, how is this going to impact our world? So with that, I've convened a panel of experts in this. So I want to introduce first to Catherine Palmer. So Catherine is very well known both within the audiology world and within the hearing aid world. She's the interim chair and professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of Pittsburgh. She's also the director of audiology at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. She's a past president of the American Academy of Audiology. She's widely published in the world of hearing aids and is well known as a complete expert in this regard. She's worn many different hats, both clinically and administratively. Our next panelist, we have Todd Ricketts. Todd is again very well known in the world of hearing aids. So he is a professor and vice chair of graduate studies in the Department of Hearing and Speech Sciences at Vanderbilt. He's the director of the Dan Maddox Hearing Aid Research Laboratory. And he's also the vice chair of the American National Standards Institute, so ANSI, the Bioacoustics Committee. So basically people who love calibration work, who love hanging out with guys like Todd Ricketts. Andy Sabin. Andy Sabin actually developed and validated a self-fitting algorithm for hearing aids. Okay, he's now the research lead for Bose here at Bose Corporation. He was the 2020 recipient of the Young Investigator Award for the American Auditory Society. And I had the distinct privilege of overlapping with Andy during our PhD program at Northwestern. And it was pretty obvious when he joined the lab that he was pretty much the smartest guy in the room everywhere we went. And of course, our last panelist, we have our own esteemed Rob Jackler. For our department here at Stanford, Rob really needs no introduction. I think I could spend the rest of the session listing his accolades, but let's just say that he's had a profound impact on our department, and I'm happy to have him here as part of this team as well. So with that in mind, I'm gonna ask our panelists a series of questions and kind of get you guys to chime in a little bit here, but let me lead with the first question that I think a lot of people, that comes to mind when you start thinking about over-the-counter hearing aids, and when you look on Facebook forums. Is audiology doomed? Okay, are we just completely done at this point? All right. So with that, let me. I think I will stop presenting here. Let me. Who should I put on the spot first? Catherine, why don't I lead with you? Are we dead in the water in audiology, or are we going to survive this transition?
Yeah, well, not at all. I think we'll thrive in this transition, and I think. And I know why you're asking the question, because I think people have been emotional and, as this has gone on, I think there's less of that. But as you mentioned, Todd and I both serve on the AAA task force, looking at OTC hearing aids. And part of that is trying to give people information. But it is, and I think you've already alluded to it, people need help with devices. And this isn't really increased access to care. This is increased access to devices, which is probably going to be very helpful to a number of people. But like you were citing Larry Humes' work, most of those people actually still needed help. So long as audiologists are already gearing up to having a pricing structure for services, this is really going to bring more people in the door potentially. So yeah, no, we're definitely not doomed. I think there's really a lot of positives that will come from this.
Todd, what do you want to add to that? I mean, you have other things you consider in this. Is again, for example, you look on the Facebook forums with some of the private practitioners in particular, and it's a pretty unique and colorful, a lot of colorful inputs and thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think that I absolutely agree that the audiology is not doomed related to OTCs, and it's a net positive. Now, that's not to say that there probably aren't some hearing healthcare professionals that are doomed, and those are the ones that probably should be, in my opinion. And so we've got some really bad practitioners, and not all of these people are audiologists, but some of them I'm sure are. And I think that the old slapping on them, how does it sound? Sounds good, send you out the door, $5,000, please, probably are doomed. And in my opinion, that's a good thing.
Yeah. So Todd, you're telling me we shouldn't be defining success by whether or not somebody returns the hearing aids or not?
I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, no, right. But that's one of the challenges we face in this world, where for many, many, many practitioners, as Todd had noted, you kind of slap it on and let it go, see how we're doing. The success is defined by whether or not somebody returns the device, not necessarily about how well they deal with it, how well they communicate with others. We define success as return rate. So that's a different issue altogether. Andy, you're coming at this from a completely different perspective. Catherine and Todd are audiologists. They've seen patients. They've done a lot of research in hearing aids. Some would say you're the enemy. You're coming in from the industry side. You developed a tool expressly to allow these devices to promulgate within the world. Can you give me some of your thoughts in this regard?
Yeah, I don't think I'm the bad guy here. I think that we're all just trying to help people hear better. And I think we're working on it. And I don't think audiology is doomed, just to just to put that one out there. I think that, like Todd said, I'm happy you said it, like maybe the bottom tier of audiology is doomed, but I don't think Stanford audiology is doomed. I think that that, well, first of all, like it's been really fascinating just to watch it over the past, I don't know, 8 or 10 years, where like the mere concept of an OTC hearing aid was a really far out idea a decade ago. And when the OTC bill passed, I watched a cool survey of audiologists, and I think, I forget what the actual measure was, but it was, how threatened are you by this, right? When in 2017, when the bill passed. And then they ran the study, and it was a big number. It was like 50%. And then they ran the study again this year, and it was like 10%. It had gone down considerably. And I think people are seeing that it's just part of like a broader menu of options, right? Like people use the analogy, like you can only buy like, a Ferrari, right? But like maybe you should also be able to buy a Ford for people who can't afford the Ferrari. And the hope, and this has been the promise of OTC all along, is that we just make the pie bigger, right? We're not necessarily stealing pie from audiologists. We're making the pie bigger and just helping more people. So I don't think audiology is doomed. I think that there's plenty of room and there's a lot of people with hearing loss, right? Like there's all the analyses say we don't have enough audiologists. Baby boomers are losing their hearing. We need to have a solution for them, and hopefully OTC is part of that solution.
I'll put you, actually, you bring up a good point in terms of like, expanding the pie. So let me ask this, and Rob, I'll leave with you on this. I want to jump to the next question. So do you guys think that OTC uptake, okay, or rather, let me, my apologies, let me start presenting here. Come back. So Rob, what kind of uptake do you think we're going to see for OTC devices? Okay, I mean, this is a fundamental change in how the world of hearing healthcare is. And there's a lot of people, and as Andy rightfully notes, there's many, many, many people who are not being served by the current model.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please.
So currently there are, I believe, some 5 major hearing aid companies that control about 90% plus of the market. This is going to be a huge spur for innovation. The FDA gives a clear guidance and roadmap forward for innovation. I think we're going to see huge innovation as many different companies like Bose enter this market of medical devices, not PSAPs, which are not theoretically meant, although they're advertised for it. Well, let's just see here. My computer was bugging me here. But I do think we're going to see a change in the notion for hearing aids as uniquely for hearing rehabilitation. And I think we're going to see a gradual blurring from the paradigm of the ear pod and the hearing aid being very separate devices to having those kind of merge. And that you'll go from what is now a very high price, low volume business, because we're not serving the people. The best metric, of course, how are we helping the population with hearing loss? We're going to end up going to a more commoditized model of high volume, low profit. But I think that these over-the-counter hearing devices will effectively be a gateway, and that many individuals, particularly older individuals, will try these out. They won't be able to fumble with the smartphones, things will get broken, things will need care, they'll need instruction. And this is where I think professionals come in. And I do think that all boats will rise in that way. And I do think the number of people beginning with these devices who graduate to more sophisticated devices in a marketplace with increased competition. That's going to look different. And there's going to be, I believe, this whole thing transforms the market in a way that encourages innovation and is going to lead to wonderful new devices that do all sorts of things, which we can talk about in the hearable type perspective.
So let me punt this to the rest of our panel. What do you guys think of that concept, of those ideas? What do you agree with or disagree with?
I would offer a slightly different perspective, perhaps. You know, for those of us who work with these patients every day, you know, a lot of people who can't afford several $1,000s can't afford $800 either. So I think we have to keep our eye on the prize, which is actually insurance coverage, specifically Medicare coverage, not just of devices, but of services. So I think, you know, we just don't want to think some problem has actually been solved. There is, you know, I don't disagree. This is one pathway and that will be great for some people, but probably not for the majority of people. You know, when you think of that big population you were talking about 3.5 million people know they have hearing loss and they pursue the traditional pathway, and 8 million know they have hearing loss and currently do nothing. 26 million don't realize they have hearing loss, right? So, you know, one of the interesting challenges is actually hearing screening. So people know they have an issue, but for those 8 million, this may be an accessible, interesting pathway. But again, for some of them, this too won't be affordable. So I think we just don't want to think the problem solved. And, you know, actually the Bose experience, I think, is kind of interesting because, you know, Bose has already withdrawn quite a bit of what they started. And Andy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure part of that was an incredibly high return rate that they didn't expect, and a lot of calls of support, needing support. And that was a little overwhelming, but you're shaking your head. So
I mean, I think, yeah, it wasn't the return rate. I think this is one of those weird situations where I work for a big company and I'm not allowed to say everything, but I'm happy to share that our return rate was actually lower than we forecast, and we did a lot of work in advance. Basically, long story, like the official line from Bose is we just had a strategy change. It's not to say that, like, we're still in the hearing aid market, right? That Lexi product that's actually available in Walgreens. Well, I probably shouldn't make any news here, but like we're going to be partnering with Lexi, and we've had a strategy shift from making our own first party products to taking a partnership approach. And the thing that we find interesting about Lexi is a thing that actually I've been thinking has been left out of this conversation so far, which is that, like, innovation in devices is a very small is just one part of this, right? Like, and even the self-fitting part, we thought that was going to be the big thing. It turns out that's only a small part of it. It does seem like having some sort of services around the sale of the device is really important. And this is what Lexi really brings to the table. And that's primarily video call support, as well as sort of nudges to help people use their hearing aids appropriately. They get points the more they wear their hearing aid, and they can cash in those points for things like extra batteries or ear tips or things like that. They've been developing what they call sort of a retention platform to really sort of to give the kinds of nudges that an audiologist would give, encouraging people to wear it more, encouraging them to realize that, like, you know, the minute you put it in your ear, it might not sound great, but if you sort of wear it for a month, it might get better and better. It seems to me that was potentially a big missing piece of the Bose strategy, is more like the services around the device beyond just self-fitting. So anyways, that's sort of a wide-ranging answer. But yeah, it wasn't quite the return rate, but I do think that support is a big part of it, especially for the older customer.
Todd, do you have thoughts on the support part of the equation, kind of like how we might navigate this world?
Yeah, and so I've been talking about this for a long time, that I think that for this venture to be successful, we need to, as a profession, help steer people through various paths. And so, being able to have individuals transition from something that doesn't work to something that does. And that's not saying OTC versus prescription. If there isn't something that works for you, having a clean, easy, straightforward path to something that does, I think is what's going to bring everybody up in the field. And so I think that, I think honestly, and this is, speaking to all of us here, I think major medical centers have a leg up in this, in being large enough to be able to provide a wide range of services, including support for OTCs, follow-up care, and other paths as well. I do want to react to one other thing, and so I'm going to take just 1 second and jump away from the moderator, and that's this issue of innovation. I think that hearing aid companies, the innovation of hearing aid companies over the last 5 to 10 years has been really undersold in this argument. And I think that the innovation of consumer electronics has been somewhat oversold. And so I had some concern about this. And frankly, I'm heartened by recent kind of collaborative relationships, like Bose and Lexi, like Sony, Sennheiser, Jabra, and the hearing aid companies. And so we're seeing collaborations between consumer electronics and hearing aid companies, so that that those expertise can merge, because some of the things that the hearing aid companies are doing are difficult to do in a hearing aid, and some of the things that consumer electronics brings to the table, they have some innovation that hasn't been produced by hearing aid companies. So I think those sorts of collaborative partnerships really could lead to some innovation. I'm not one who believes that consumer electronics will step into this and immediately have vastly more innovative products, maybe from the self-fitting standpoint, but from a product standpoint, I don't think they're going to be vastly more innovative right away. I think it's going to be more incremental.
Anybody else have thoughts on what Todd said there? Because I thought you brought up some interesting points on the innovation end. Kind of the blurring of the lines, so to speak.
Well, I think too, given how the final rule came out, we're going to see this incredible range of products, I think. And so we'll see something like, that Andy's working on that'll be, sophisticated and amazing, great sound quality. Bose, Bose is known for sound quality. You can count on that. And I think we'll see things, at a whole nother end of that spectrum. So I think that's another role for audiologists to help guide consumers. We should be the place for education, whether it's on our websites or in person. And we should be really set up for that. Todd and I have both worked on frequently asked questions. They're on the AAA website, and they're on other professional websites, just to help consumers, navigate that. And this isn't new to us. I think probably true of everybody on this call. Our clinics already see people who buy things off the internet, even though they're not, technically OTCs yet, and they come in and they want advice. And I think we want to stay positioned that way. And again, there needs to be a price structure to charge people for time, but for help. So I think part of that innovation thing is it's going to be hard for consumers actually to navigate what's really innovative and what's really, a super simple amplifier.
Yeah, that and gets, please, Rob.
Just a thought I'd like to raise, and that is that I agree with the point that when folks get an OTC hearing aid, they often will not be able to optimize it. They won't be able to maintain it, especially older folks. It assumes you can navigate an app and that you can customize it in an app, which a lot of older folks probably can't. The question then is, the law does not require it to be a licensed healthcare practitioner, an audiologist, in order to adjust it or fit it. Is there going to be an inexpensive geek squad that goes to senior centers or that offers a service at a lower price by minimally trained technicians that come on out and basically do the self-fit in a guided way at people's home? If we as audiologists and in the hearing care world have a premium price point, anything like the component of the retail price of a hearing aid today that's built into that kind of service. Might we stimulate, entrepreneurs to provide that service at a lower cost?
What do you guys think about that? Let me ask you.
Well, we could, but I mean, the other way to do it is physician, which is part of what we're doing at UPMC. And, you can think of them as audiology assistants. We call them communication facilitators, but they're people who extend practice for us. And we're in senior living, they're in different clinics. And so even if you were going to sell OTCs in your audiology clinic, you would not expect that to be the audiologist. That would not make sense. You would want that to be an assistant. So I don't disagree. I mean, I think that could be innovation, right? Of who are these helpers who could be in really interesting, and these could be community healthcare workers, right? That's a really interesting group too, that we interact with and train in hearing. So I think we could extend service all over the place. And I think audiologists could actually take a really interesting role in that if they want to.
Yeah, one of the things that Dr. Jackler said that I 100% agree with is, and I think it's both OTC, and I think it's going to be even to a greater extent Medicare coverage, is we will be transitioning from low volume, high cost to high volume, low profit, I should say. And so that is going to require things like assistance. It's going to require, service delivery models that are very different than our current models for a lot of our patients. Some of our patients are going to absolutely require a full level or even an enhanced level of service over what's being provided at the top of practice right now. But I think to keep cost, I mean, the dirty little secret that everyone in this room probably knows and the public seems not to is the cost savings for OTC hearing aids is really not device. And so the device savings is relatively small comparatively to the professional services savings. And so I think it has to be done in a more efficient manner.
So Todd, let me follow up there a little bit, because some of the theme that's come up, that we're I see again and again in the conversation is, of course, how do we provide these services? We're talking a little bit about fitting. Do you guys think that how hearing aids are fit is going to change fundamentally? And I know Andy's developed a self-fit model. Todd, you literally were one of the people who wrote the book on how to fit hearing aids, for an individual. So can you maybe, for the audience who might not be immediately familiar with it, describe what a traditional path of care for fitting is, and maybe we can have Andy talk about some of the new tools in this regard, just so people get a sense of what the scope looks like and if there's other models that might manifest.
Yeah, I think that there's fitting and there's fitting. and so I think that's one of the things that's been really simplified when people talk about OTCs is trying to bring it to a glasses level as if the prescription is all of it, and or trying to bring it to the level that really gain fitting is all of it. I think that's part of this, but there's a whole bunch of other things that go on in the selection of hearing aids related to style and way beyond what we have time to get into. And so I think that at the top of the scope of practice, people are doing needs assessments and trying to identify devices that are, fit the patient's needs and additional either additional devices or additional settings that might fit the patient's needs, and then going in with a prescriptive procedure and fitting it in the patient's ear. And I think that one of our big focuses has been how we adjust gain, but that's just one part of it, and that can be done, relatively automatically already, even if an audiologist is placing a probe mic in the ear to adjust the gain. And then there's the self-fitting methods like the Bose product and some other products that are soon to be on the market or already on the market.
Andy, I think you had a few slides. Maybe you could just show briefly, just because again, some of our partners who may not be as intimately familiar with the work that you've done, say as Catherine or Todd might be. So maybe you could just show a few slides on kind of what some of the self-fitting procedures look like in your development and validation.
Yeah, can do. I only have slides. Shoot, what am I sharing here? There it is. I only have slides for our self-fitting method.
That's reasonable.
Yeah, okay. So basically, this is very low level for probably most people in the room, but like the way any hearing aid fitting in a clinic, it typically starts with measurement of an audiogram, right? What's the quietest tones you can hear, and then that's put into some sort of a formula that chooses gains for the patient, and then after the patient listens to that, oftentimes if they've worn that prescription for a while, they come back and they have this fine tuning, which is a little bit more casual, and the audiologist tries to address some of the concerns that the user noticed out in the field. I actually think this is a really good model in general, and we tried to sort of mimic that, or at least sort of stand on the shoulders of all the people before us who invented that. And the way that we did that was with this simple interface. We have these two wheels. We call them world, volume, and treble bass, but in reality, what we're trying to do with the left wheel is sort of do that sort of audiogram-based fitting, even though we're not actually measuring an audiogram. And for the second one, we're trying to capture some of the variance in the kinds of complaints people have with fine tuning. The way that we did that was we did some data analysis on a wonderful database from the CDC called the NHANES database, and basically did a big old principal components analysis on that to try to figure out what trajectory can we make through that database that captures the most hearing losses. Doesn't capture everyone, but it captures a lot of them. And we came up with this world volume wheel, and I've got this slick little animation that I hope will work. So hopefully audiologists in the room are familiar looking at something like this, where you have frequency on the x-axis and the amount of gain on the y-axis, and each of those different curves is the amount of gain that is applied to a different input level. So the bigger curve is for the quieter input, and the smaller curve is for the louder input. And as you move that world volume wheel, what you're doing is effectively just cycling between prescriptions for basically the most common audiograms in that NHANES database. And what you could see is, the compression is increasing. So we're assuming sensory neural hearing loss, right? Sometimes that's not the case. And the gain is increasing, and the spectral tilt, and it's becoming a little bit more high frequency emphasized. And then we do a similar thing for treble bass. It seems like a decent chunk of the fine tuning, certainly not all of it, but a decent chunk of the fine tuning that happens is really just getting the sound quality right. And so we just have this sort of tilt where you could take all the gain curves and then just move them up and down. And so, the idea is we're trying to sort of mimic, at least at some abstract level, what happens in the audiology clinic. And we've done a study with real users at Matt and my alma mater at Northwestern. There's a lot in there, but my favorite plot from this comes from the sound quality. So we had each individual, they had two settings, right? They had the setting that the audiologist chose for them using audiological best practices, meaning probe mic fitting and fine tuning. And that was one setting. And then they had the setting that they chose with our interface. And there was a brief pause. And so they were able to sort of, this is out in the real world, audition the two settings and see which one they like better, with a beautifully designed user interface here, where they just saw A and B that were randomized. One was what the audiologist chose for them, one was what they chose for themselves. And this is what the data look like, just across a lot of users and a lot of ratings. And so if anything, there's a slight preference towards what they chose for themselves, right? And this is just a non-technical user moving some wheels on the screen. And so it seems like, what we can argue whether, sound preference is the right measure here, because you could also argue that they're not getting the full benefit of the speech intelligibility, but they do like how it sounds a little bit more. And if our success, as Matt, you started off with at the beginning, if the success is like they keep wearing it and they keep getting some benefit, it seems like the preference would be a thing that matters, even if they're not getting the absolute most benefit they could get from a particular prescription. And then I think that's a reasonably quick, it's a good overview of us. I have some other slides here, but I think, Matt, that they kind of overlap with what you said at the beginning. So maybe that's a good time to pause and just say that, like, that's just so we're talking about like what does the realm of self-fitting look like? One of those things is our interface. Now there's 4 other devices in the same category. I think all of them do some form of in situ audiogram. So of course you can do that too, right? The hearing aid itself can deliver tones, measure an audiogram, and fit a prescription as well. that seems to work. Just, I mean, according to the FDA, at least they're substantially equivalent. And then the one last thing I want to throw out there is that the FDA did something really weird in the regulations, and we argued against it, but didn't win. Where there's actually sort of two categories of OTC hearing aids. There's self-fitting OTC hearing aids and non-self-fitting OTC hearing aids. So talk about like a market that was already going to be confusing for the customer. Now it's like even more confusing. And the difference is really, the spirit of it is in the complexity of the interface. So if you have presets, like just 3 different programs, you just tap on your device, that's in the non-self-fitting category, and the bar for regulatory approval is actually very low. You don't have to run any clinical studies, for instance. However, if you do anything more interesting, then you're in the self-fitting category, and then you do have to run clinical studies. So there's sort of this tier of like, all right, so maybe the most precise prescription you could get would be from an audiologist. And then one tier below that would be a self-fitting OTC hearing aid. And then one tier below that would be a non-self-fitting hearing aid. And so that's going to be it's going to be a confusing market. There was one note that I took, I think someone else said that, is that like, that's one thing that really concerns me, is that like, we're going to, like, maybe audiologists are in the right place to do it, but someone needs to really help simplify the market for customers, because it's just going to be there's just so much noise. And not to mention all the things you could buy on Amazon that say hearing aid but aren't hearing aids, and the features and CE products that are effectively hearing aids but they don't call them hearing aids. Like, just figuring out how to navigate that space is going to be, like, it's hard for me, and I do this for a living. It's going to be extremely hard for customers. So I think there's a real opportunity for some service, whether it be audiology or somewhere else, to really help customers try to navigate that space. And now I'll shut up.
So that's a great point, Andy, because I jokingly say with people all the time, it's going to, the first few years particularly, going to be like the Wild West. So I don't know, I mean, Rob, Todd, Catherine, do you guys have thoughts on strategies that might help patients to navigate that? I know, Catherine, you said you guys are trying to do some work within the community with audiology extenders. Do you guys have thoughts in terms of what sorts of things patients could or should be looking for, or what sorts of things you think might help people in this process to try to go through all these different categories of hearing aids, everything along those lines? Or is it just gonna be trial and error?
Well, I think it just depends on how you want to position yourself. In a clinic, we can do the work to pick devices, and literally a device or a couple devices that we think fit this niche well, and we can help people so they don't have to navigate it, because it will be too much to navigate. So I think we can play a role. I think it's up to the clinic. Some people will want to be involved in that. Some people won't. I certainly, as an audiologist, it would really be great if people went ahead and got a hearing test. And of course, the whole point of OTC is you don't have to have a hearing test. But it sure would be good to start there, and then they could really be given good advice. Because in a couple of things said, there's absolutely an audience who can make good use of these kinds of devices, and in a sense, they're the people who say, I kind of have a $500 problem. I don't have a several $1,000 problem. But I would just love to take exception to the common phrase that hearing aids are too expensive. Now, there is certainly a range. So you can go to a practice that's going to tell you they're $10,000 for 2 hearing aids. That is too expensive. But if you really look at the average for 2 hearing aids, which is closer to like 3,800 or 4,000, they're actually not too expensive. They're appropriate for a chronic condition that's being treated individualized, like Todd said. So that's the individual coupling to the ear and all the assessment to do everything correctly. So those are the devices and all the services. The only reason they're perceived as too expensive is because they're not covered by insurance. And I think we have to kind of pause and realize that, because other chronic conditions, the cost of treatment is far more expensive than hearing aids. But nobody talks about those treatments as being too expensive because they're covered by their insurer. So that perception, I think sometimes we're too quick to say, oh yeah, hearing aids are too expensive. Actually, they're not. They're too expensive for an individual to handle, but they're actually that care is pretty appropriate if it were covered. And of course it would be even less if it were covered, because that is how that would be managed.
Todd, Rob, Andy, what are you guys' thoughts on that? idea. I mean, it's a compelling argument there, Catherine. Rob, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to differ a bit. I do think if you look at the demographics of the baby boom population, there's an awful lot of people with no savings for retirement, or who are living enough years beyond their savings to have very limited resources. I do agree that we came close with the Build Back Better bill about putting in audiological services with devices into Medicare. Some Medicare Advantage programs do offer some limited benefits in that way. I do think we owe to our senior citizens without resources to provide this service as a nation, no question about it. I have to differ, though. I do think that for many people living on Social Security and fixed income, $3,800, or in this area, maybe more like $5,000 or $6,000 more typically, is a real barrier to getting their needed rehabilitation, and is many multiples of what it costs for eyeglasses. If you're talking about 2 lenses, can be gotten for a matter of several hundreds of dollars rather than a number of thousands of dollars. So I do think that there's a lot of extra costs padded into the hearing aid. I agree, no question, diabetes is far more expensive, cancer is far more expensive, but people are voting in a way, partly from the stigma, partly from the cost. And I do think, I know there was some question about innovation. Let me raise a question. What if Apple decides, by analogy to its Macintosh computers, they put out highly sophisticated computers with great capabilities, and they let other people teach them how to use it? That's not part of what they own. So, if you begin to see where earpods are going, and you start to think about something you're wearing on your ear as a multifunctional device that includes biometric monitoring, it includes instantaneous translation of languages, it includes all sorts of features that normal hearing people want to wear on a daily basis. And so you go from sporadically wearing it for your audiobooks or your music or working on your telephone to a population of normal hearing people wearing these devices. And what's to keep Apple from coming in and putting the capability of customizing the output of this device for hearing impaired individuals, and then putting it on professionals like audiologists or others who will actually do the customization, the fitting, and all that, analogous to the way they do it with computers now.
Well, they already
I think we're already there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's already done. An interesting med student down in New Orleans did a whole project just unleashing the power of your cell phone. What these things already do, and you already own it. Yep. And it's free in the apps, and it's their hearing aids. It's speech to text transcription. So yeah, that's already there. I would just comment too, Dr. Jackler, we don't disagree. It is absolutely too expensive for the individual. We're in agreement. It needs to be covered by insurance, and when it is, it'll right price to a certain extent, because insurance will force that. I guess, and I'm harping on that, but I just don't want us to lose sight of that. OTCs are not going to solve the larger problem of access to hearing care, including, and I think maybe Andy, you said this, or Todd, the people who get a device and need help, if those services were covered, that would go a long way too, to support that, even though they have an OTC, but to have the service piece, like we've all said, some of them are going to need, would make a big difference. Even that out of pocket is going to be a strain for the people you're talking about on fixed incomes. Absolutely.
I agree. I mean, I think, look, I absolutely think the government should be covering, or not the government, the insurance companies should be covering hearing aids, and I would be cheering from the rooftops if that happens. OTC is like a partial measure towards that. And actually, there's kind of an interesting intersection where I've had the sort of privilege of being in the room with now with some health insurance companies who have Medicare Advantage plans, for instance, and it seems like there will be no cost hearing aids offered in the OTC space. Like, there's always some sort of subsidy, or there's often some subsidy in these Medicare Advantage plans, but the cost of the OTC product might be so low to health insurance companies that it might end up being a zero cost, zero out of pocket device. And that's the dream, right?
Well, except for, is that really the dream for everybody? Because I get why it's your dream, but you know, when you think about that, for the people with, you know, the danger, Andy, you know, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but the danger is they check the box, right? And they say, oh, we finished with hearing because now there's this no cost. Yet lots of people that won't be sufficient, right? And then they will still be in the same position. So that's like my concern. We think, oh, OTC's just solved everything when there are a lot of people, and honestly, the people who see us now that are way more complicated.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I wouldn't say OTC solved everything. I would say OTC has solved something, though, because there's certainly voices in our community that says OTC hasn't solved anything.
No, it definitely does. But the health insurer, they're the ones who you know, the danger is, do they just say, oh, good, we're done with this, you know, and when we're really not done with this.
Yeah, I think that
I hear that.
I think Andy brought up one of the points that I thoroughly agree with as problematic, and that is the split in OTC devices makes this even more worrisome to me, that we have, you know, devices with efficacy data and devices that will have no requirement whatsoever to have any sort of efficacy data at all. And so those devices could be marketed cheaper, produced cheaper. And you know, that it may be true that having efficacy data for everybody might have stifled innovation to some extent, but it also would have been better for consumer protection in my view.
Yeah, I think it even gives sort of a backwards incentive to a hearing aid manufacturer. Like it's hard to get the efficacy data. And I think we do this for a living, right? Running these studies is no joke. And the FDA, at least when we had to go through it, was like scrutinized our data, right? And if I'm, you know, running a hearing aid company and there's a path for me to not have to do all that, I'm going to take that path because I want to get my product out. And so it sort of incentivizes you to make a worse product because the bar is lower, right? And so I think they screwed that one up, but.
That was exactly my view on it as well, is they actually incentivize people to go the wrong direction in product development by doing that.
Do you think that's going to incentivize you know, patients and consumers to go the wrong direction, Todd? Do you think we're going to leave this guy?
I don't think the consumer will, unless I don't think there's any amount of education that we could do that would be truthful education, where we could say, okay, clearly a self-fit product is going to be better than a self-adjusting product, because we don't know that, because they could do a self-adjusting, you know, there could be some real incredible innovation in self-adjusting where the product was really well done. And so I think that it's just adds a layer of confusion where, hey, here's a self-adjusting product or an OTC product that happens to be cheaper because it's self-adjusting, and therefore, you know, maybe that's going to be the free OTC product. And so I think that leads to the potential for increased consumer confusion.
Can I raise the question? We've talked about cost a lot, but how about stigma, which has been a big barrier? I wonder whether the democratization of hearing aids, coupled with the fact that Gen Zers wear their AirPods all the time, whether or not the old rubric that, you know, you're 10 years older when you wear hearing aids and lose 20 points in IQ, right? Is it a matter of form factor? I mean, if you're wearing an earbud, you're technologically sophisticated and with it. You wear a putty colored device behind you that has a different form factor, you're old and you're infirm. How can we manage the evolution away from the stigma? I mean, you stick something in front of your face that's glass and plastic, and it says you look fashionable and smarter. You stick something on your ear, you're older and you're dumber. It doesn't make any sense. How can we as a profession change that stigma? And is there something we can do in the form factor of the devices that we're putting out there that will send that message of technological sophistication rather than infirmity?
You jumped on my next question here, Rob. I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Well, I would just comment. So a study that I published a number of years ago actually showed the stigma of other people looking at people with hearing aids really has disappeared. So the problem is for the individual, right? Which is important. But I just make that point because we don't really have to convince the rest of the world that it's okay to wear a hearing aid. It's the person themselves. They're their own barrier, as opposed to other people actually thinking it's a problem. But I don't have an answer to your question, because every company has tried every form factor known to man. And that's, though, an interesting point, because, it makes me laugh. And again, because I see patients every week, but the very people who are sophisticated enough and with a milder hearing loss to pursue these OTCs are the same people who want it to be invisible. And they're still going to need me, because to be invisible, you need an ear mold, and you need a really deep ear mold. So it's kind of funny, because the audience OTCs are meant for, a lot of them won't go after that because of the form factor.
Yeah, and I would just echo Catherine's point about it not being as much of a stigma as it used to be. I think that certainly was the case when there were lots of custom ITEs. But I think that, my viewpoint that the mini VTE form factor, the RIC device form factor, really is a relatively unambiguous device. And I think, one of the things that reinforced that with me more than anything is what Bose did, which is not go with a form factor that was somewhat like what they were using with earbuds, but in fact went to a RIC style form factor, which is the form factor that's most popular in hearing aids. And so I think that alone leads me to believe that that the most popular form factor right now is not as stigmatizing even to individuals as what we did have in hearing aids 10 and 15 and 20 years ago.
And the hearing aid does function as an AirPod now, and it's really easy to talk to patients about that. This is your hearing aid, and then it's being an AirPod, when you have connectivity. So that's an attraction. But of course, that's only once they're actually in our office, right? Discussing that. So there's that.
Yeah, and one thing that we've talked about internally is like, maybe a hearing aid makes you look old or feel old, but wearing an earbud as a different stigma, it makes you look rude. And I don't think people have gotten to the point where they see an earbud and think, oh, you're using that to hear me better, right? And I always ask, and I can't see the room here, but I ask how many people have ever seen someone wearing an earbud at a restaurant that had like a waiter, and I still have yet to see more than one hand go up. I think that the idea that the AirPod is going to sort of immediately get rid of the stigma, I mean, maybe over time, but like it hasn't happened yet. I mean, the next time you're out to dinner, look around and see how many people have earbuds in, and I bet the answer is 0. But if you look closely, I bet some of them have RICs. It turns out the RICs are really good design for a hearing aid, right? It makes there's a lot of trade-offs you have to consider when designing a hearing aid, and like the RIC is, I think, the one that balances those trade-offs the best at the moment.
So we're bucking up on toward the end. So I want to give our audience a chance to ask any questions, to see if any of our audience members have questions. I mean, Mega, has there anything come through the chat yet, or?
I don't have anything through the chat, but feel free to either unmute yourselves or raise your hands and I can call on you, or paste them into the chat. But as of now, I can open it up to anyone on the floor if you guys have any questions.
Yeah, I have a question for Andy.
Sure.
Andy, are those over-the-counter stuff, is that going to take care of problems with speech and noise?
No better and no worse than a traditional hearing aid.
Really?
Well, it's just a matter of dispensing hearing aids, right? It's not, it doesn't require any change to the technology. I hope that I think there are other trends that will lead to better improvement of hearing and noise, in particular, machine learning, AI kinds of algorithms seem extremely promising there, but those are just as relevant for the prescription market as the OTC market.
Thank you. I have to add something. I'm an 83-year-old physician, and I never felt that I needed hearing aids, but my wife said, you got to get hearing aids. So I went and got hearing aids, and now a happy house, happy spouse. But you guys need to market in that way, not for yourself, for your spouse.
For sure.
Right, Matt?
Well, yeah.
I think half my patients I saw today, they were going to say, well, I hear okay, but my wife thinks I don't necessarily hear so well. So anybody who's been in this game for a while have heard that one.
But I don't think he's wrong. You know, with the advent of OTCs at that lower price point, I absolutely think we're going to see these as gifts, you know, because that's, so I think he's joking, except for I think he's right.
Okay. I agree, Catherine. I think you're 100% right there. I think there'll be, and it's a great entry point to these sorts of devices, and it's getting that care that people need. Do we have other questions from our audience?
Matt, I have a comment. This is Hamed Sajadi.
Please.
As to Rob's, the remaining stigma, I think the best way to deal with it is by celebrities and, you know, Instagram and stuff like that. You know, when Reagan was wearing hearing aid, helped a little bit, but he was an old guy. But I think if the young people and celebrities propose it, you know, Justin Bieber did a lot for the Ramsey Hunt syndrome. You know, there's a lot of stuff that can happen with our society is just based on celebrities and Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. So that's the best way to remove the remaining stigma.
So you tell me we should have hosted this on TikTok instead?
Oh yes, and you could do the dance while you're doing it. So that would.
Matt, there's a question in the chat, which is, I think, a really important question about trial periods and returns. So the FDA final rule is not requiring that the device has to be able to be returned, but they do have to label on the outside of the box whether it is something that can be returned or not. But interestingly, when you think of an actual audiologist who does function under state licensure, if there's language in our licensure about needing to offer returns or warranties or like trial periods, we will need to do that because we're regulated at the state level. So that's kind of an interesting difference depending on who would be selling it. And the FDA's attitude is that in no way is prohibitive to have those. That actually could be a positive for people to have those. So the audiologists will operate under their own rules, regardless if it's, you know, an OTC or not. So an audiologist might be required to accept a return, even though the product maybe doesn't have a return. So it's an interesting thing to navigate at this point.
I have Claire here who has a question. If you can unmute yourself, Claire, that would be great.
Hi there. So my name is Claire Umeda. I am a graduate of Vanderbilt. So hi, Todd. I was wondering if you felt that the increase of over-the-counter hearing aids would change the way that we tend to bill hearing aids. So at their current state of things, for those of us who are not audiologists, we typically bundle. So we include the services in the hearing aid. Do you think that audiology clinics will be using more unbundled pricing as these hearing aids emerge onto our market?
I think that's going to depend on the clinic personally. I think that clinics have to do what works for them in the structure. And I think there are clinics that are already unbundled, and those will be ones that this is maybe easier to integrate. And I think there will be those that bundle OTCs with follow-up care. And so I think that, you know, in my view, that's going to be something that kind of individual clinics have to figure out for themselves within their own pricing structure.
And you can have both models.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, which we do. So we have a completely unbundled model, and that's for people who come to us with devices, whatever the device might be, versus we have bundled pricing because of certain insurers actually require that still. So you could have both models.
Yeah, actually the game will be quite different for pediatrics. We have something similar, Catherine. We've got pricing set up for people to come in with outside devices, and then we've got basically an all-inclusion model as well. So, yeah. Do we have any other questions?
We should point out that OTCs are not for under the age of 18.
Yeah.
Right. That is absolutely.
Good for people to know.
Yeah, I think, you know, pediatric audiology should not be, my hope is that we don't see children with these devices. You know, they absolutely need the care of a pediatric audiologist.
Well, it's interesting. They are not for people under 18, but you could picture a few off-label. I've done a few talks with pediatric centers recently. You know, if you thought about when a kid's going to the beach and maybe you want something really inexpensive, a kid who has some transient hearing loss and you want a device for a little while. So I would just caution there could be some off-label uses through an audiology clinic. We really hope we don't see families going out and using this as an option, which again, if hearing aids aren't covered in your state for kids, that absolutely could happen.
Yeah, but I expect it will happen. My hope is that it does, but I expect it will.
Yeah.
Well, be respectful of our colleagues here on the East Coast and our panelists. So, because it's getting quite late there. So I think I want to use this time to thank, if everyone can please thank our panelists for their time. This has been a very thoughtful discussion. And if any of you in the audience have questions in the future, don't hesitate to reach out to myself. I'm having funnel things to Catherine, Todd, Andy, and of course, Rob can readily be found. Thank you all so much for attending tonight. I greatly appreciate it. Bye-bye, everyone.